Lost Media.
Narcissists are professionals at alienating a victim from their own children. They weaponize them against them. I discovered this part of it far too late. She said to me, "Some of your children will never speak to you again."
Lost Media presents the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel with Jon and Padideh.
Welcome to the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. I'm Jon McKenny with my friend
Padideh Jafari.
How are you, Padideh? It's been a little while since we've recorded. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I know we talk pretty much every day. We just don't record every day.
We do. Things are going well?
Things are going well. The firm is incredibly busy, but it seems like everyone in LA and Orange County is getting a divorce these days. So we're really busy.
Go figure. That does keep you busy. There's no question about that. I too am busy and just getting over bronchitis. If my voice sounds a little weird, you'll understand why. It's been a little ride with that. So, and I'm coming up on a birthday soon too, which is going to be a lot of fun. Going to have a little celebration at the house this upcoming weekend, and wish we didn't live on opposite coasts so you could be a part of that.
I know. I'm sorry. My husband and I are missing it, but
Yeah,
we will be there in spirit.
Well, no question. So we have a really great topic today for the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. One that probably generates almost more emotion than any other, and it is the idea of parental alienation. And you have to understand that narcissists are professionals at alienating a victim from their own children. They weaponize them against them and use lots of different tactics. We're going to kind of talk about some of these today and how they go about this, because you want to understand what you're in. And I don't know about you, Padideh. I discovered this part of it far too late, unfortunately, in my relationship. And we can kind of talk about how all that came about for me as well, so that people understand what's going on. So provides for a pretty difficult experience.
Yeah, and I've seen it obviously from the legal perspective in the courts. Parental alienation, California now has codified coercive control, which is another sort of name for parental alienation.
Coercive control sounds right, is what
Yes.
it sounds actually.
So I've seen it from the legal perspective, and clients that I represent who've been alienated from their child, and so we'll go through the legal definition.
I've got it. I want to say up front that you brought up the legal end of it, and you have that perspective, where one parent or the other is trying to alienate or trying to keep a parent away from their own children, and they're doing it through legal means. And generally speaking, I would guess, Padideh, that's with younger children. Is that not correct?
Yes. So we talked about earlier that there's two kinds of alienation. The first is with the children who are younger through the legal process. And then the second is this false narrative when the children start to get older. I think this was all your idea, so I want to make sure that you get credit for this.
Yeah, well, no, it's it's no credit necessary. I really do believe there are two different kinds of parental alienation. One is a legal alienation, not illegal, but a legal alienation, where one parent tries to alienate the children from the other parent through a legal process. And again, this is usually done with younger kids because they are controlled by the courts. And through the divorce, these kinds of things happen. And then you have an emotional alienation as well, where the narcissist is trying to create a false narrative in the children so that the children hate the victimized parent. So as if it's not enough for a victim to have to go deal with this narcissist face to face and one on one, and then have to work through the divorce process and all of this, they also have to go deal with their children, and perhaps particularly in adult children or children that are older teens have to deal with this kind of hatred that the narcissist projects onto their children. And quite honestly, it's almost like dealing with many narcissists in your own kids. It can be excruciatingly difficult.
Yeah.
So, Padita, have you seen a lot of this emotional alienation in your line of work? Because I know you certainly you wind up having a lot of child custody issues, and there's no question you see the legal piece of this. But what about the emotional alienation?
Yeah, the emotional alienation happens, I think, with older children because younger children just don't know, right? They don't know that they're being alienated from their other parent. Um, but with the older children, I would say by older, I mean 7 years old and up, you
Hmm.
see that they're being emotionally manipulated by the narcissist. And it's really, I have to say, excruciating to watch because,
Mm.
as you know, we represent only the victims, which we say are victims to survivors. We do not represent the narcissist at our law firm. And so when we represent the victims, we really empathize with this part of it because
Hmm.
although they're dealing with a narcissist and it's a high conflict divorce or a paternity case, they're now being alienated, as you said, by their child. And so it's very difficult to watch. And so I just wanted to give a quick definition. I found this um, this morning, actually. A judge said this in one of my cases. So I
Hmm.
wanted to give a definition of how the courts view parental alienation. He says, both parents are enjoined and restrained from saying anything or doing anything which might tend to destroy the affection of the child for the other parent.
Wow.
And they will not permit any third person to do so. So, not only the parent, but also a third party. And that becomes important because we know that with narcissists, they have narcissist mothers. Sometimes they get with, a significant other who can be,
Yeah.
also alienating. So that's why the third party is also important. So that's what the
Wow.
court's definition is. And it's such a simple definition, but you can see that word destroy. That's what the narcissist does. That's how they achieve parental alienation or coercive control.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that we
Yeah.
got that out there.
So let's talk about this for a second. So I've had people ask, when does this begin? And I, full disclosure, I discovered this piece of it. I knew I was married to a narcissist the last couple of years of the relationship. I kind of figured it out and had been seeing a therapist for it. But the thing that I did not realize, and I discovered far too late, was this parental alienation component. And for me personally, I learned in one statement where I went, I was just shocked, just shock. So throughout the process, so I got to this place where I felt like I needed to tell her that I wanted to separate. And I sat down in the room and we had some conversation. And I'll never forget this. She said to me, some of your children will never speak to you again. Now, you have to understand something. I never spoke to my children about my ex. Never badmouthed her to my ex. Still don't. Never have. Never will. That's not my place. Let God deal with that. But in that moment, I realized that my ex had had all kinds of conversation about me with my children. It's emotionally incestuous, painting her problems onto the children. And in that moment, I realized, oh my God, something else is going on here that I did not realize was happening. And truthfully, she's right. And as I look back, and of course hindsight is now 2020, I can go back in my own life and identify some of this coercive control or this parental alienation, smear campaigning, whatever you want to call it, because all those things are components. I can go back to this beginning even when the children are little, trying to establish a position of power over the children over me. I can remember even when my kids were little, wanting to go be involved in something and she would fight me for it, and wanting to go do something for the children and she would fight me for it. And there were even conversations where I would go, why are you fighting me? It feels like there's a power struggle for the children all the time. And I'm not in a power struggle with you over them, but it feels like you are constantly trying to fight me for prominence and preeminence over the children. And ultimately, as I look back on this whole parental alienation process, I think it began that far back, as though she was almost preparing for divorce right from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we said this, I think, on the first, our pilot episode, that actually narcissists fear abandonment because something happened to them as a child where they were abandoned. So they're mimicking this. And I think actually that the narcissist prepares the child before the child's even born.
So
So
you think
there's
even at some subconscious level, like this is going on, like from the beginning, from the very beginning.
Yes, and I think they strategically plan to have children because they know that the child cannot leave them, but their spouse will definitely leave them at some point because they have these abandonment issues and people have left them in their life. So
Hmm.
that's how they look at it, like, this person will unconditionally love me, they can never leave me. And so that's why, if you look at it too, they have multiple children. They usually don't have just one child. So they have, they say the
Hmm.
golden child, and then they have the one child that figures them out, and then sometimes they'll have a middle child. So like they'll have like 3 or 4 or 5 children just to make sure that they are not abandoned. And so I actually
Yeah.
think it starts very, very early on in their mind and in their psyche.
So looking back for me, of course, I'm alienated from my children now, and again, not under my will. Basically, they've divorced me too. But at the same time, I can go back now and look, and one of the things I could never figure out while I was still married, and it shifted gradually over time. It was always me and then all of them, like they were in their own little tribe, and that she created and cultivated this little tribe with the children, and I was an outsider to this tribe. There was conversation that went on just between them, and I was always the last to know. And over time I realized also that conversations that were taking place with my kids, instead of my kids coming to me, they would go to her, and then she would communicate to me, and then I would communicate to her, and then back. And I didn't realize this stuff was happening as it was going on. But these were some of the telltale signs of parental alienation while I was still married. It was happening all under my nose, and I had no idea that this was taking place until that moment. And then now, as I look back, I go, "Oh my God, yes, this is this is what took place. This is what happened. It started when they were very, very little, and ultimately, the attitudes that the narcissist has towards you, they give to your kids. And if they've done that, they've won."
Right. Yeah, it happens over a long period of time. And because narcissists are master manipulators, they know exactly what to do and what to say. And it can be very subtle, John. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
like, don't like your father, we don't like your father divorced us. It doesn't even have to be that extreme.
Mhm.
It can be as simple as the child comes back after visitation or parenting time with the father. The child comes back home and the mom says, "Oh, dad gave you another book?" It's very subtle, right? And the kid's
Yes.
like, well, I like books, and
Mhm.
the kid doesn't know, right? And it's this very subtle way of saying it instead of saying, "Oh, wow, I see that dad, you and dad
Yeah.
went and got another book. I know how much you love books." I mean, it's
Mhm.
just this very subtle thing, and over time, this is why this is the long game for the narcissist. Over
Mhm.
time, the child knows, listen, we deal with a lot of children, okay? And these children are extremely smart. They're actually more smarter today than I think in our generation, because in
Mm.
our generation we didn't have access to technology, knowledge, education the way that these children have. And a lot of these kids, their siblings, sorry, their people that they go to school with are also their, divorced parents. And so they talk, right? They talk amongst themselves. And so it's just a little subtle thing over time that happens. And that child knows this is not good. Mommy's not happy.
Mhm.
Mommy's not happy. Dad did something wrong again. He bought me a book. And so over time, this,
Mhm.
wears on the child to where, they just don't want to go with daddy anymore because they know if they go with daddy, they're going to be in trouble with mommy.
Well, and I think, as I think about some of this too in my own life and with my own kids, these are subtle conversations. The image in my head is like a jagged rock in a river, right? And you kind of stick it in the river, and years later, the rock is smooth. It's kind of the edges are smoothed off the thing gradually over time. And I really do think for parental alienation, that's kind of how it begins. And sometimes it can be ridiculously passive. Generally speaking, the parent who's the victim is the better parent. They have a healthier sense. In fact, they're really the only parent in the relationship. The narcissists tend more towards being more like children. They tend to be permissive. They tend to manipulate children through their permissiveness. So a victim would come up and say, "Okay, do you know what? You're not having." And this is an illustration. Victim would say, "You're not having candy for dinner," and the narcissist goes, "Well, you know your father, right? It's passive disrespect. You know your father. You lay down healthy parenting, and the narcissist redefines healthy parenting to the children, and ultimately over time winds up creating in them this weaponized kind of child, this child that hates the victim, so that when all of this is done, when the narcissist, when the victim finally has the courage to leave the narcissist, not only are they leaving their ex or their spouse, but they also wind up losing their children in the process. And you talked about something else that I found really fascinating there, and you talked about like a third party. I hadn't thought about that so much, but I think I saw a lot of that in my life. What do you think about that? Where do you kind of see those third parties being a part of all this?
Well, narcissists are usually enabled by their family members. They always say that, and this is very common, that narcissistic men have narcissistic mothers. And so they have this mother wound. And so, we see that dynamic a lot.
Hmm.
But it could be anybody, right? It could be um, a sibling, it could be another parent, it can be a girlfriend or boyfriend of the parent,
Hmm.
kind of subtly saying something. It doesn't have to be so overt, but it's enough to where the child figures it out that they should not be with the other parent. That's why that word destroy is in that definition I gave earlier. You're
Yeah.
really destroying the child's, like, the child is excited, like, I want to show daddy, like, the book. I want to show mommy that daddy bought me this book. And it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this is a bad thing because look at mom's reaction.
Right.
And so, and we're saying mom and dad, it's interchangeable, we know that.
Absolutely.
And so it's really a brainwashing the child over time. I mean,
Brainwashing.
yes.
That's a big word, but I think it really does apply here. That this process of constant disrespect, of painting their own baggage towards the narcissist, painting their own baggage towards the victim, on the children, and giving them these very same attitudes, is really like a brainwashing over time. It's frog in the kettle, where they don't realize the heat is being turned up, and it's almost like preparing the children for the moment when the victim finally has the courage to step up and say, "I'm not going to go do this anymore. I'm out." And the spouse goes, "Guess what? I got your kids too." And that brainwashing takes place over a period of time, um, where the victim is constantly disrespected and constantly seen as the enemy, um, while they deliver good parenting, which is kind of ridiculous. I think it's very, very sinister, when you look at it, and the kids have absolutely no idea. I know you were talking about third party. In my particular situation, I had a couple of third parties that really just hurt my situation. One was my parents, and now I've understood. I've looked back, and now I can see some that, um, my parents have. I'm not going to call them narcissists, but they have, some narcissistic tendencies in the way they handle conflict, and they want to pretend about stuff instead of dealing honestly with it. They're not so present when it comes to conflict and those kinds of things. And I know the mantra that not only my ex, but my parents and probably my sisters as well. I've lost my siblings and my parents in this process too. It's that, well, John has abandoned his fatherly responsibilities to the family. He's not just abandoned her, he's not just left her in marriage, he's abandoned our family, which is not true. I certainly want to be involved with my kids, but they've been told that I left them, that I divorced them, which is absolutely and unqualitatively not the truth. I divorced my ex. And because they were told that, they've divorced me and have this attitude and disposition towards me. In large part, it's like dealing with my ex in little form with the kids. On top of that, is the church that I was a part of has done the same thing. They've told my kids that I've abandoned them, and that's not a fact, and that I have abandoned the whole family. And these kinds of things are some of the brainwashing is very passive. I think much of it, like we've talked about, is over a period of time, and then there's a lot of it like that, which is kind of overt towards the end of the relationship, where you wind up going, yeah, that's a problem, and these third parties help crystallize and codify the story in the children. And ultimately the narcissists have the best case scenario. They don't necessarily have to continue alienating the children from actively alienating the children from the victim. They've already done it. And guess what? The children choose themselves to be out of relationship with the victim, and it's through their own, because the narcissist has replicated their hatred, uh, for the victim in the child.
Yeah, you're right. They often say, dad or mom, they'll say, is leaving us, is divorcing us, and it's like, no, I'm not divorcing my child or
Yeah,
my children. I'm
yeah,
divorcing this person who is a narcissist, and I can't, and nobody can live with this person anymore,
right.
not, and so that's sort of how they frame it for the child, and the child has this abandonment thing, and they cling to the narcissistic parent because they
Hmm.
feel like they're going to be abandoned, right? Because look,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
so I think this has been such a great conversation, because I know that our listeners who are victims to survivors are going to really identify with this message. But I know you do also. We want to give them hope. Like, how do you win your child back? What do you do to win your
Hmm.
child back? Like, let's say that the narcissist has done this and your child is alienated from you. What do you do? What are the steps that, a couple steps that you can take? What do you think?
First off, I think that we also have to understand the tactics some of the narcissists are using against you. Um, Triangulation, and part of winning your children back is understanding these things and making sure that these tactics, you don't give into them in any kind of way. Triangulation is a good example for one. Basically, it's where instead of you communicating with the child directly, they have controlled the conversation because, again, narcissists don't trust anybody and they certainly don't trust the victim. So they've given your kids their distrust. So your kids don't trust you because of the narcissist. So instead of communicating with you directly because they don't trust you because the narcissist is given that distrust, they communicate through to the narcissist. The narcissist communicates to you, and then you communicate back, and then over to the children. So some of these tactics that the narcissist uses have to end. So I know for me personally, these kinds of things as I divorced, these kinds of things were going on, and I had to end them. So my kids were in college at the time, and I was certainly doing what I was supposed to go do and pay for some things for them for college. And what initially was happening was they would tell mom what they needed. Mom would text me because I wasn't talking to her on the phone and still not. And then and she wanted me to respond, and I said no, I'm not doing that. Okay, these kids are grown ass adults, and if they need something, they can communicate with me directly. I wanted that conversation up front. So that was one of the things that had to end. Um, the lying and the gaslighting that narcissists give as well. Sometimes you're gonna be in a position where you have to redefine the truth for the kids. Not taking the disrespect that your narcissist has for you from your children as well. You want to be in relationship with them, but you don't want to tolerate disrespect. Um, and you don't want to be in a position also where you're talking badly about them. And I will tell you this, that the one piece of advice you get advice on narcissistic abuse from lots of different people and lots of different things, and there is one piece of advice I've gotten that has been absolutely consistent through every single person I've spoken with about narcissistic abuse and trying to win your children back. And it's this piece of advice: don't ever, ever, ever badmouth your ex to your kids.
100%.
That you take, look, they're down here, you know, scavengers, and you're gonna live up here, elevated. Um, I don't ever speak of my ex negatively. In fact, I don't speak of her at all. And if I do, it's in a historical context. Hey, we did this together. We did that together. And I'm speaking positively about memories. Um, I do not paint my attitudes towards her on my children. I have them, but I don't ever paint my attitudes towards them on the children. I don't ask um, about my ex as well. And it's not, doesn't come up in conversation. I don't allow it to come up in conversation because I don't want to have to converse about her. She's not a part of my life anymore. But I want to be the person who's going to live elevated and who's going to live above all of this muck and this stuff that is created from the narcissistic abuse and the divorce and all of the fallout from that. I want to live above it. And every person I've spoken to who's kind of been through this, and also I have to tell you, from friends who are children of narcissistic children from where there's been a parent who's been a narcissist, they tell me as well, you have to play the long game. And the long game in this is that you don't ever disrespect the narcissist to your children. You don't do what they've done. You don't stoop to their level. You don't weaponize kids against their other parent. You don't play that game. You live above it. And one day the children will kind of figure it out. And that's, you know, that to me, I think is probably the best piece of advice I think I could give personally. And it's how I'm trying to live my life. As painful as it may be sometimes to go do that, I'm trying to live my life like that so that I'm never put in a position where I'm bad mouthing.
Yeah, I mean, I've known you for many years, Jon, and I can honestly say you've never, ever said anything bad about your ex. You do talk about her in a historical context. You do say
Mhm.
the things that happened, but in a factual manner. You've never called her names. You've
Yeah.
never done any of that. And you and I are friends, and you could
Yep.
easily do that with me. And
Yeah.
so I think you're absolutely right. You get to practice healthy parenting on your own and show this to your child. So I always tell my client, you have to be the stable parent. And
Mhm.
what does that mean? Do not talk ill about your ex. Show up for your child, whether they want you to show up or not, right? Because children don't get a say in that necessarily. Obviously, when they get to be adults, they have some say in that. But, show up for your child. Do not take your anger of what the ex did to you on your child, because it's very easy to do that, like to transfer that.
Yeah.
But do not do that. Be the most stable parent that you can be. Take online classes. There's lots of in California, there's lots of online parenting classes. There's actually like three that I can think of just the top of my head. Read books, watch YouTube videos. How can you be the most stable parent? Because guess what? Your child is not only going to need that as they're growing up, but when they become adults and they come back to you and say, "What happened?" You're going to be able to explain this in such a way where you're not blaming, again, you're not blaming the narcissist. And I can give you a very raw picture of this. And again, I know from the very first episode, we said that we were going to be very raw and real with our listeners.
It's been that.
And I had a situation, it was 2.5 years ago when I married my husband. We got off the wedding, the whole wedding weekend. Our oldest son was with us, and he came to me and he said, I need to talk to you about something. And I'm, brand new stepmom, but I've been in his life for 5 years. So, and he's 25. So we were like friends. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, I think my mom's a narcissist.
Mm.
And I literally, like, it felt like somebody punched me in the stomach,
Mm.
because I was not expecting this type of dialogue, right? And
Yeah.
I said, why do you say that? And he literally went and named, as if he had read something, and he said, she's always the victim. She's always blaming others. She's continually blaming dad, even 8 years after their divorce. Everything is dad's
Wow.
fault. And so he literally went and listed them. And I promise you, as God is my witness, I never said the word narcissist. I'd clearly never said it about their mom.
Yeah.
I'd never said the word ever. And my stepkids don't follow me on social media. It was just literally, he had done his research, and that was
Mm.
an opportunity where I could have commiserated with him, right? I could have said, you know what, you're absolutely right, I'm so glad you figured this out. Like, let's
Mm.
cheers and like badmouth your mom now. And I had everything in my spirit was like crying out not to do that. And I literally said, okay, I understand what you're saying. I cannot confirm this or deny this. You continue to do your research, but let's talk about something else. Like, let's talk about the wedding. Like, what was your favorite part about the wedding? And he had
Mm.
actually said a speech at our wedding that made the entire, that everybody cry.
Yeah.
And so he said that he had never seen his dad happier in all of the years of his life, which, made everybody cry. But listen, here's the thing, you cannot commiserate with your child. You cannot, when they come back to you and they said, you know, mom or dad is done this, have they done this? Are they a narcissist? This is not an opportunity to unload on your child. You have to protect your child at all costs. And
Mhm.
you have to say, we're not going to discuss this.
Well, you have
I'm
to be the parent, right? Because ultimately the narcissists are not parents. And and pouring your emotional baggage into your child is not good parenting. They're your children. There are some things that shouldn't ever be communicated to your children, um, and and issues of marriage and things like that. They should never be communicated. So I mean, you handle that so well.
Thank you. I really, like I said, it was like a spiritual moment where I was so excited to be, his stepmom and be like the cool, I want to be the cool stepmom, right? But this is not the time to do that. And it was really, I had to set that boundary that I had no voice and no ears for him to speak ill of his mother. And
Hmm.
here's the thing, and a child only has one biological father and one biological mother. And so that's it, right? They can have step parents, stepmom, stepdad, aunts, uncles, the whole village, the whole tribe. But they really only have one biological parent. And so you want to protect them as much as possible, because if the child on their own figures out that one of their parents is a narcissist, this is not an opportunity for you to be excited, because you know what the child's going to do? They're going to go in a rabbit hole of what that means. And they're going to figure out that they were alienated from their innocent parent. And that's the relationship that this boy now has with his father, where he lives in Colorado. So we go out to see him. He's coming out to see us in
Hmm.
2 weeks with his girlfriend. Like, he's cultivating this better, healthier relationship with his father, because he
Hmm.
knows what happened. I mean, he's 25. He's figured this out. And
Yeah.
I I always tell you, John, that your children will figure this out. And you just have to be a parent first, and you have to be a strong parent and just continue. I don't know what people are listening, if they're praying to God, if what going to church, listening to their rabbi. They need to have a strong faith, because their child will come back, and I can guarantee that.
It's interesting. You bring up something. I think if I can kind of say it right, you you give them the freedom to figure this stuff out for themselves without you manipulating the situation. That's what you're saying here. I think is that correct? Would that be right? Because it seems like such an important piece of this thing, because when you're victimized by a narcissist, right? Like you said, we're sitting there at the wedding, like every piece of you wants to go say, well, they figure it out. You want to jump on that bandwagon, and every piece of you wants to go, well, yes, here I am thrilled because you finally figured it out. Your spouse, your ex-spouse is a narcissist. Now the kid understands. Let's commiserate, but this isn't a place for that. You allow them the freedom to go figure this stuff out, and give them the time to go figure it out, and you be the good parent the whole way, and let them discover it for themselves. I think that's a piece of this that's so important, because I certainly understand the want to go vindicate yourself to your children, to have those kinds of conversations, because they don't understand this, and there's really no way for them to go back and understand it either, because they weren't there in the individual conversations. So it's kind of he said she said to you, to the kids. But when you
100%.
when you give them the freedom to go discover this, um, and they do, and they get to that place, that's where I think they and not only does it do this, not only does it put them in a place of wanting to draw close to you, but it also they also realize the manipulation in the past, and it affects their relationship with the narcissist ex. And that's exactly the story I've heard from the children of narcissistic abuse, where the parents have the victims have walked it well. They figure out one day that they've been emotionally manipulated against somebody, against this other parent who should be and hold a very significant role in their lives. And they come back, and their hearts are drawn back to that person.
Right. I mean, he basically figured out that he was a pawn in his mother's game of alienating his father. And so you need to,
Wow.
as a parent, just protect him. Yeah, let him speak, okay? But
Hmm.
you don't also want him to know that yes, this is true. Like what good parent wants their child to know that yes, your mom or your father is a narcissist? Because if you really are like that, you're not a good parent in my opinion, because your job is to protect your child. So if I sit there and commiserate with him and just let him validate everything I've been told by my husband, who, by the way, is the best father, um, what does that do? It's like, okay, yeah, it might make me feel good, but it's going to make him feel worse because it's like, oh, now my stepmom knows this too.
Yeah.
So he actually, during that conversation, asked me, "Can I read some of the documents from my parents' divorce? Can
Oof.
you get that for me?"
Wow.
And it was like this urgency, and I said, "Absolutely not, absolutely not." And I said, "And even if you can get that because that's public information," I said, "Please promise me that you will not search for that information." I said, "Because it's irrelevant. What happened in the past happened.
Well, it's
You're
kind of
now
none of their
here."
business too, right? Because you don't want them having to go feel like they were a part of that in some kind of way either.
Right. And so I just said, don't search for that. I said, let's just continue to cultivate the great relationship we have. I
Good
said,
advice.
you have a new stepmommy. And he laughed. And actually, I say step monster, and it makes all three of the boys
Ah,
laugh. Every time I go, okay, the step monster is here, they laugh because I like literally treat these children like they're a feather. Like I always tell my husband, I'm like, they're like a feather. Like they can't even fall to the ground. Like I literally treat them like just they walk on water. Okay.
mm,
But the point of it is that just continue to be, I mean, we know victims of narcissistic abuse, what are they? They're usually very empathetic, they're good people, they don't lie. Just continue to be that, which is what you've been all this time, Jon, and your child will come back. Just have faith that your child will come back to you.
yep. I'm waiting on that, and I'm trusting in that. One of the other thoughts I have before we I know our time's kind of winding down here, but um, there are a group of people out there who are staying in relationship with a narcissist, perhaps staying married even, um, for the sake of the children. Like they would divorce if it weren't for the kids. And I get asked a lot about that. Should I leave now? Do I leave the kids in with the ex? And I personally I waited till my kids were out of high school and did that intentionally because I wanted to give them a home life where they had a sane parent, quite honestly, a healthy parent, right up to the end. And I understand if people decide they want to go do that. I think that's right. At the same time, it muddies parenting. When I'm with my kid now, all they have is me and healthy parenting, and that's what I give, and it allows her to go do her thing, and for them to kind of armchair quarterback that without me, without my protection over it. So I don't know that helping. I don't know that it helps necessarily to stay in a situation like that. If you can afford it, maybe the thing to do is to create that environment of duality where the kids have a healthy place to go to. Even if they're constantly speaking badly about you and all that, it's still a healthy place. They'll figure it out in time. So so consider that as well. Think about it, if you're in that place. I know that there are many who just want to keep it together until then, but understand the places where you're being where your kids are being manipulated. You may, if you're married right now to a narcissist, look at some of these tactics: disrespect, triangulation. You're particularly disrespect. So insidious and flies underneath the radar, um, where the narcissists have created an inappropriate dependence on the children or confiding in them. That's again, emotionally incestuous relationship. Look for those kinds of things, because those are the building blocks of parental alienation, and I miss them. So you be smarter than me and figure that out up front. So look for those kinds of things, begin to defend against them, have direct conversation with your children, and again, be patient in them returning to you. As hard as that really is, be the good parent, be patient, don't badmouth your ex. Good conversation today, Padideh. I could have gone on.
No.
Parental alienation too. We could have done this for a while.
Yes, and we might, talk about this more as we get comments from our audience, if they want to hear more about this and strategies of, what they can do as a healthy parent. Please let us know in the comments of our show. But great seeing you, Jon, and
you too, as always.
See you again next week.
This has been the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel with Jon McKenny and Padideh Jafari.
Thank you for listening to the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To hear other episodes or read the associated blogs, visit olasmedia.com, and be sure to follow us on Instagram with the handle narc.podcast. The guest views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are their own. The information presented is for general information purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. The co-hosts are not licensed therapists. Seek professional help, as information is often state-specific. The Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel is produced in studios in San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Baja, California. Olas Media is an IVC media company.
Olas Media.